Welcome to another edition of Toony Talk, ladies and gentlemen. Today, 5 years after the fact, I believe it's 5 years, it's either 4 or 5, I'm going to be talking about The Incredibles 2, because I actually saw it just the other night, and I had put off seeing this movie because I loved the original Incredibles, but when they dropped Incredibles 2, they dropped the trailers and people started talking about it. I was hesitant because I didn't really like the trailer, and people started saying how terrible it was and how it completely was a waste, or not even a waste, it was just underwhelming compared to the first movie, and the whole thing just came across as underwhelming and mediocre. And so I just said, okay, well, I guess it's not worth my time, and I just left it alone. Well, that was a mistake. I actually watched it, and I was surprised by how actually good it was. I went in with no expectations of any form of quality, and I was pleasantly surprised at how good it was. Is it average? Yeah, it's good to average. It's not the greatest thing I've ever seen, and it's certainly not better than the first movie. I've heard a lot of people say that. I don't know where they get that. But it is an average good movie. It is a good popcorn flick. It is fun. I like the way the characters are used. I like the family dynamic in this one. I feel like it's stronger than it was in the first movie. They have more time to actually flesh out the family dynamic a little bit better than they did the first time around, and I really like that, and I really like the way that they do things. And I was so worried that it would be Elastigirl good, Mr. Incredible bad, and that they would emasculate Mr. Incredible, but they honestly didn't. They honestly didn't. They didn't go the ultra-feminist route with Elastigirl, and they didn't go the emasculated stay-at-home dad with Mr. Incredible. They didn't do anything like that. It was just a good, wholesome family film, done at the right time, I think, in 2018. Now, they could have done this film years earlier, and they probably should have. It is clear that this movie has been in development hell for most of its existence, and it really shows in some places. There are a lot of holes and gaps in elements of the plot, things that should have been more fleshed out that weren't. This movie feels like it moved incredibly quick, no pun intended, compared to the first, which really took its time and sort of lingered on things and developed things a little bit deeper. This one feels incredibly rushed, and there's no greater example of that than the very weak villain, the disappointing villain. That's the consistent complaint about this movie that I actually agree with, is the villain is probably the worst part, because there's so much potential there. There is a good villain somewhere in there, but you don't see it on screen. The villain's motivations are incredibly misplaced and weak, and it feels like they didn't properly execute a good villain, which is incredible, no pun intended, when you consider that Syndrome, despite the fact that, yeah, his motivations are a little bit weird, they still were able to develop him into a threatening villain. Whereas the villain in this movie, somewhat threatening in terms of what they can do, but the motivation doesn't make any sense whatsoever. It's so pitiful, it comes across as petty and vindictive and nonsensical, which, again, I make it sound like Syndrome, but it's really not. It's actually worse. It's actually a worse villain than Syndrome. And I'm not trying to spoil it because it's supposed to be a twist, but a lot of people have said they see the twist coming. So, it's an absolute mess in terms of the villain, and it's a shame because I do like the villain, but you always want the villain to go further and the motivation to be deeper, and it's just not there. And it exposes the weakness of the villain very quickly. When the tide turns against the villain, it exposes the villain for who they actually are and how weak they actually are, and just petty and vindictive. And it just ruins the whole villain. And a lot of people pointed out this is the second time we've gotten a non-superpowered villain, and it's just weird. The other element of this film that feels severely underutilized is they have new supers. They have new superheroes have come back. They're calling them superheroes now, where they were just calling them supers before. I don't know why they chose to change that in terms of continuity. I think they're called supers once or twice in this movie, but they're calling them superheroes again. And they're great, but they are severely, and I mean severely, underutilized. I mean, oh my goodness, they do nothing with the introduction of these new heroes. And there's not that many, but they look cool. They've got cool designs, and they look fun. It looks like they're rebuilding this world from what it was established to be in the beginning of The Incredibles. You know, that's what drew me to this world, along with the aesthetics and the character designs and all those sorts of things. This is a cool world, and yet it's severely underutilized. It feels like they need a third movie and some spin-off series and comics, things to really flesh this world out, and I don't know what they've really gotten since then, other than that Rise of the Underminer video game. But regardless, these new heroes are severely underutilized, and I think they're actually present on the poster. If I'm looking at it correctly, yeah, they are, but you hardly see them until towards the end. They're introduced, and then there's not much else that happens with them, and it feels like that's what this movie is. It introduces things, and then it never really pays them off in a satisfying way. And I think that's a big problem people have with it, is it's trying to build the world, kind of like the first movie did, but it doesn't take the time necessary to actually build it correctly, and it leaves the audience going, wait, I want more of this. Why are we moving on so soon? And it does this quite a lot. I do like how who you think is going to be the villain doesn't turn out to be the villain, because it would be so insanely cliche that it would be painful. It'd almost be worse than what we got in many ways, and what we got was actually pretty mediocre and unfortunately bad. But I do like that the misdirection is there, and I like the idea that one of the allies of the heroes who you think is going to be the villain ends up just being an actual ally, because they completely set them up to not be. And I do like that they don't go that route. I think that that's incredibly good. I don't like when it's so predictable who is going to be the villain that it's just eye-rolling. And a lot of people think that about who actually is the villain. But I do like that the one that you would like is actually a good person. I like that. I really do. I don't feel like we get enough of that in today's nihilistic media. That's just me. So, I thought this was a solid 7 out of 10 movie. It has flaws, but its action sequences are good. The characterization is good. It's decently paced. It just is lacking in so many areas compared to the first movie that it's very easy to look at this and say it's a lesser movie. It doesn't. It's clear that it had a troubled development, which is why it took so long. It's very clear. You can see it all throughout the movie. Even if you enjoyed it like I did, it's very obvious that this movie is flawed and that a lot of decisions were fought over and a lot of compromises were made. So it'll be interesting to hear exactly what caused the movie to underperform like that and what caused them to make the decisions that they did. I don't know if there are any resources, if Brad Bird has said anything. I have no idea, but regardless, I'll be looking into it because I'm fascinated by it and I want to see this universe continue. I'm just worried about doing so in the modern day. So anyways, those are my thoughts on The Incredibles 2. Let me know what your thoughts are down below. Thank you very much for watching. This has been Super Koopa TV with another edition of Toony Talk. I will see you guys next time. God bless. Have a good one. Peace.